Here's where we start to get into the meat and potatoes of the core of Bank of North Dakota and really how it works. These are our verticals in business. These are our main functional business lines and units. And the primary one is right in the middle here, the participation lending at market rate. This is the one where we partner primarily with the 91 financial institutions, and we participate in loans with them. I'll get here in a couple slides on specific examples of how that works. For here, I'll just say that's $5 billion of our total $10.6 billion asset base, partnered through 91 FIs, and our participation rate is about 50%, which means on average, we'll buy half of their loan. So if they have a $10 million loan, they want to sell us some of that on the back end. On average, we'll buy about half of that. What that does is it really leverages on top of leverage. Now let me pause and explain that. If you're a legislator elected, sitting there in your legislature, you have $1 of tax revenue coming into you from the tax code. You have that dollar and you appropriate that dollar to some agency, right? So that dollar goes out to, let's say, the Department of Water for water projects. And then eventually water spends that dollar in your next annual or your biennium or whatever it is for that water project in line with that. What happens to that dollar while it's sitting there in transit, right? As it comes in and it sits before it goes out and gets spent. Well, if you don't have your own if you don't own the bank, you're gonna have to put that in a bank so that it can sit there and wait its transaction. And if you put that out in a bank, which most states do, you're gonna get paid some type of a deposit rate on that. And you're probably on the short end of the curve right now, you're probably earning 3.5%, but when rates were zero, you were earning 0.25%. And that short end of the curve operates like this, right? It goes up and down. It's whatever the Federal Reserve wants the short end of the curve to be. That's what you're subject to at the end of the day. However, if you own a bank, so that dollar comes in, you're sitting on that dollar, and you appropriate that dollar, and there's timing there. If you own a bank, then you deposit that dollar in the bank that you own. That bank can then create $5 to $10 off of that dollar. That's banking leverage, okay? Because I, as the bank that you own, as the CEO of it, I'm gonna take that dollar and I'm gonna lend it out, okay, at a leverage rate, or I'm gonna put it in securities depending on what type of balance sheet I wanna manage, depending on my mission. So I'm going to multiply that dollar, and then I'm going to return on the long end of the curve, which is much more stable and typically much higher than the short end of the curve. Today, it's like a 5-6% rate. But I'm going to be able to get that 5 to 6% rate over a 5-year time period. I'm not going to be subject to the Federal Reserve's up and down echocardiogram of the short end of the curve. So it's leverage and it's access to the long end of the rate curve, which is really the power of why you own a bank. And that's why banks make money, okay? At the same time, when I'm borrowing that dollar and I do it right while I'm leveraging you and making that nice 5-year return, you get to still use that dollar. And that's the key. The liquidity is still there for the legislator to make sure that dollar is available to be spent by water whenever it needs to be spent. There's all this timing of cash flows that we manage as a bank, and that's the real power of it. That's, when I say magical banking leverage, that's the banking leverage. But your state bank concept can even go one step further, because what I just described is what every private bank and credit union does out there. That's how they work. Your public bank can go one step further, because now we're going to leverage 91 financial institutions in our state. I don't know how many we have in New Mexico, but you could leverage all of them. Not only are we going to leverage loans on our balance sheet, but we're going to participate with you at an average of 50%, so we're actually going to double that. So now for the state of North Dakota, it's not just $5 billion going out from Bank of North Dakota, now it's doubled to $10 billion going back into the state, still from that $1. So it's really powerful leverage that you have. That's why I'm so passionate about the model and how much it can help a state at its core, because there's real power to it, real financial power just to the core of it, and now we can get into the extra things once you build that core model.